thank you so much for this very, very kind introduction. And trust me, I'd rather be with you and talk about how we can turn CO2 into something really useful. However, the end of the semester means I'm sitting here grading final exams, and there are very strict deadlines. So not much choice with that, but I'm grateful that you have given me the opportunity to share some ideas, some thoughts with you, building on materials that some of you might have seen in the past, or at least have heard me speak about. But let's see if I can add something new or give you some good reminder of why it's so important to look at details. We all understand that capturing CO2 and converting it to something useful, products that is some enormous opportunity and also a critical need, but that doesn't make it right under all circumstances. And we have to look at such details. And some of those I want to address today. I think most or all perhaps have heard of the Global CO2 Initiative. Just briefly, we envision that CO2 capture and conversion is a mainstream carbon management solution. For that, we have a mission and principles and values that we formulate to achieve this as quickly as possible, because the one thing we definitely do not have is time, right? All of this is really urgent. And it is urgent because, as we all have seen these curves many, many times, we need CCUS to stabilize the climate. And it's also overall key to a sustainable economy in the future, where we have to look at a whole portfolio of activities that include replacing fossil carbon so that we do not add unnecessarily new CO2 to the atmosphere, for example, through electrification or entirely carbon-free alternative products. We have to remove at least some of the legacy CO2 in the air and water. And we have to also harvest CO2 as a resource for carbon in particular. There will not be enough carbon for all of our needs in the growing world economy if we stop using fossil carbon. The biosphere is not able to support us with the needs we have. So CO2 capture and conversion to products becomes a necessity rather quickly. And I'd like to think about the whole sphere in carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or sequestration, in 2 time and magnitude scales. For now, and for a finite duration, we have to deal with enormous amounts of legacy emissions. I mean, on the order of ballpark, 1 trillion tons. But going forward, we still will have unavoidable emissions, and I carefully avoid saying unabatable, because we may choose to emit CO2, even though we could do without. So at this lower level, we can actually, as we've demonstrated in the past, balance the carbon budget by capturing CO2 and turning it into products, some in durable sinks, some in a circular fashion. And then it becomes really important to understand that the source of the carbon dioxide really will make a difference as we look at this. And it also will make a difference in what we do with the CO2 if the products we produce have a long lifetime and therefore remove carbon at climate relevant scales, time scales from the environment, or if we make something, let's say a fuel, that gets used up and ends up as CO2 in the atmosphere again in less than 100 years. To simplify conversions and at least entry-level conversations, we have introduced a classification scheme that we call track 1 and 2 for long and short-lived products. And the interesting thing here, and there's the intersection with sequestration, is that carbon capture and storage is mimicked by track 1 products. So very lucrative way of removing CO2 for good. But the details, of course, matter, and we have to look at it in greater granularity, especially since we begin to see really complicated and very questionable claims about carbon neutrality or even carbon negativity of products. As such, Graham Faber has spearheaded the writing of this report that you can all download. I will share the slides so you can link to downloadable versions of everything that I share here. But looking at all of this and just not trying to go through this fairly complicated and colorful matrix in the short time that I have here, I still want to highlight that here we try to capture in a reasonably accessible manner how the combination of where the CO2 is taken from and what happens with it has differences in the climate impact and also in terms of economic values. We can imagine doing that kind of organization in other contexts too. Let's say how much money is being invested, how many companies work, etc. But let's focus here on the climate and economic aspect, and just start with looking at the differences in the CO2 source. Anything that starts with fossil carbon, directly with fossil carbon taken out of the ground, whether this is a fossil fuel or a fossil fuel used as a chemical base, and a downwind process that either sequesters captured CO2 from those sources or turns it into products, will not even be carbon neutral. I think it's a really important statement to make and re-emphasize. Carbon capture is not 100% efficient. And if we would capture everything that's emitted, we would just come out carbon neutral, assuming there are no other CO2-related emissions with what is being done. So that's the first high-level observation. Contrasting that with biocaptured or direct air capture or direct ocean captured CO2, there we actually have a chance to end up with carbon negative products that durably remove CO2 from the environment, or at least if we make short-lived track 2 materials, we have a circular carbon economy that helps keep the climate stable. Right? So it really is critically important to understand that difference in where the CO2 comes from makes or breaks our carbon budget. Often overlooked and so critically important. I understand that presenting, discussing such a matrix is complicated, takes a bit long, and is overly full. So I've worked with editors at The Conversation, and we have put this in a somewhat simpler format to highlight what is being done with the CO2, and 2 columns, the origin of the carbon dioxide. So I think this was very well received over the last couple of months in helping people to get a clearer sense of how to think about CO2 utilization and how to account for CO2 emissions. That said, it still is not that straightforward, of course, as we all know, and why we continue to run global workshops, the next one actually coming up 3 weeks from now, to compare notes and how different communities assess life cycle performance and techno-economic aspects of CCU products. And this is something that is important, especially as we look at so many different jurisdictions handling CO2 and the flexibility in who gets to sort of choose how to balance their textbooks in different ways. So being clear about how this is done is globally important. And in addition, life cycle assessment, in contrast to things widespread belief, is much more than carbon counting. It includes many other categories that are equally important to whether or not such technologies make sense. And if you want to hear more about this, if you have a chance, You can still register, I believe, at this point, probably only for online participation at this workshop that runs over a day and a half in Ann Arbor in 3 weeks, where we talk about details of life cycle and techno-economic assessments with a particular emphasis on societal factors and how to include those into such analyses. So how do we eventually select what we should and shouldn't do, right? Of course, key aspects remain at the forefront of our thinking: environmental risks. We certainly have to ensure economic sustainability, but in my opinion, while of course at the end, if it doesn't work, nothing works, it's of secondary importance, because if we want to get things done, we will always find policy solutions, right? We have a long history around the world that subsidies can really move mountains, literally. I think what also is important to note is nobody really likes pipelines, no matter what's being transported. And therefore, when we think about CCU, we need to look at ways in how we can co-locate capture and utilization so that we don't even need to transport. And that avoids costs and certainly also eliminates political and societal barriers. So it's a win in so many contexts. And then I think as we have sort of moved this field together as a community, we are really now at the point of where we see emerging deployments at larger scales. And we need to look for synergistic opportunities and use those to work with our communities to showcase how these new job opportunities can help them not lose the income that, of course, everybody needs. We have an opportunity to clean up old polluting industries with the new industries that we are envisioning. And there are even aspects of national security. We're not just talking about energy security, but certainly also in the defense context. The materials that we make can actually play a critical role. And then lastly, there's a huge opportunity for waste cleanup with industrial and mine tailings waste, including legacy coal waste that we can mineralize. And looking at all of that, as we built this new industry, let's also plan ahead. Let's not invest billions of dollars into facilities that will not live for more than a couple of decades, if that. And with that, I'd like to close and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Volker. And I hope that next year when you're with us in person, you'll be able to see some of the fantastic carbon negative materials, including a carbon negative steel from Germany. And we've got some prototypes here. So Kolja, why don't you wave one of your models around so that Volker can see it, and then we'll send you the slides. Go ahead, come on, come. Oh, he doesn't have it today. Okay, we'll send you the information. But you're the first to mention national security, and I co-chair the Indo-Pacific Command Environmental Security Working Group for Education, and I'm going to be asking everybody's permission to share our presentations with that group because the national security dimension is indeed important. Are there questions that anybody has for Volker? I found your rubric fantastic. So useful to have that. Yes, please identify yourself and ask your question.
Thank you so much. I'm Elise. I work with Carbon Engineering. And I had two questions for you, Volker. So the first is, there's a lot of discussion about what the appropriate measure of permanence is. And I see you've selected 100 years. And I'd wonder, what went into that selection? We're humans, so we like these nice round numbers, but I'm not sure if there's anything magic in your eyes about the number 100. And the second question is around your heat map in terms of, comparing the opportunity for ambient capture to geological sequestration against capture from the atmosphere and storage in long-term products. And I saw that the rating for ambient capture to geologic sequestration seemed like the down rating from that was because there's no associated economic good that can be sold in existing marketplaces. And I'd wonder about, in that framework, how you would rate actually pairing removals with products through market mechanisms, through regulatory frameworks, like we see in, say, the California low carbon fuel standard that allows essentially, evaluating the opportunity of direct air capture to sequestration to be paired with a transportation fuel, and in that we make the connection between atmospheric capture to sequestration and an actual product that has value today.
Yeah, fantastic question. I really appreciate it, especially this latter point. I think let's not forget that ultimately what we have to do is balance the world's carbon budget, right? So sometimes these market-driven opportunities make sense. Still, I'd like to argue for keeping it as simple as possible. And sequestration, whether we want it or not, will always be a societal cost burden. Right? There's really no way this can make money other than being paid for by society, and it's important. So that's what we need to do. But yes, I think there's value in looking at alternative ways to get things done. As far as the number 100, I agree with you. Humans like round numbers. So if I had come up with 93, that would have been odd. But 100, I think I like because it's one that is also used by the UNFCCC, and there is, I think, no doubt that probably all of these track 1 materials live far longer than 100 years. But I do like 100 regardless because it's associated with approximately a human lifetime. So that sticks in people's mind. It's long, right? It's long. It's a little bit longer than I live. Whereas if you think about 1,000 years, which is also a number that's frequently used, that's nebulous, right? And I mean, what is the responsibility then in terms of monitoring, just like with sequestration? So the 100 is something that from a practical point of view is long enough, and it's also scientifically backed to be actually far longer. If that makes sense. Thanks again for the question.